Welcome back, everyone.
Episode 35, Malice.
So, the beginning of this episode is pretty unique in that it's almost entirely devoid of dialogue for the first 2.5 minutes. Instead, the moments shown during this opening montage are coupled with the song Death Image, or Chichi no Shi, or The Death of a Father. It's a track with many names, as I mentioned back in the video for episode 29. But regardless, despite the lack of dialogue, a lot of the scenes shown during this sequence are worth pointing out because they give us some insight on what the characters are all doing in the weeks leading up to the final confrontation. And while I can't delve too deeply into everything that's happening just yet, seeing as a lot of it is setting up future events, we're still going to go ahead and briefly talk about some of what we're seeing. So to knock out a few real quick, one of the first shots we see is that of the guys at Task Force headquarters, where we see them all working. And if I were to mention anything about this particular scene, it would be the fact that we see Light check his watch, showing us that it's 10:08 p.m. But really, that's mostly superfluous information, seeing as it's just the time without any indication of what day it is. But after that scene, we check in on Misa and Mogi, where we find them playing a card game. And I did want to point out that Misa has her bird again, which means that the SPK must have gone and picked the bird up for her, which was pretty nice of them. It's also nice to see that the bird has, calmed down a bit, because the last time we saw it, it was freaking the hell out. But after this, we zoom out on Misa and Mogi to find that Nier is watching them on one of his screens, while the other screens are filled with the same pages of the notebook that we saw at the end of the previous episode. Now, after that, we end up transitioning to just outside of NHN, where we see someone being aggressively taken away for... well, I'm not entirely sure why. If I had to guess, I'd say that maybe he had planned to harass Takada in some way, seeing as he's taken down just as she and Lindner pull up. But regardless, after the dude gets taken away, Takada and Lindner get out of the car and make their way into the building. And it is worth noting that the shot we see of Takada and Lindner walking into the building is clearly coming from a person's POV, meaning that someone is apparently watching them, though there's no indication of who that person is at this time. Now from there we actually end up switching to Mello as we see him talking on the phone with someone. And while his lips are moving, I, unfortunately, lack Rester's ability to read lips, so I don't know what he's saying, nor do we have any clear confirmation on who he's talking to. But after that, we check in on Giovanni for a moment as we see him continuing to trail after Mikami, and he's not really being all that subtle with it. I mean, he's on Mikami's ass. I'm gonna need you to be a little more covert, my guy. But from there, we switch to Takada during one of her news broadcasts. And I did want to spend a little longer talking about this part, because I decided to look up what a coming-of-age ceremony is. And it turns out that it's a real national holiday in Japan for those who have turned 20 in the past year, which is, or was at the time, the age of legal adulthood there. The ceremony is meant to symbolize their transition into adulthood, along with the new rights and responsibilities that come with it, like voting, drinking, smoking, etc. But the reason it's important within the context of the show is because it always takes place on the second Monday of the new year, which is the show's clever way of conveying to us just how much time has passed since the last time a date was shown, which was January 6th. Because if this ceremony is currently taking place, it must mean that it's at least January 14th now. And I just thought that was a really cool way of informing the audience of what the date is. But off we go, switching scenes again, as we see Giovanni reaching out to Nier and Rester to let them know that something went well, which is implied by him giving them a thumbs up. However, the good news from Giovanni is immediately juxtaposed by the next scene, wherein we see Lindner on the phone and... well, her reaction definitely isn't implying anything good. However, given the lack of dialogue, it's impossible to tell who she's talking to or what the conversation is about. Now after this, we switch back to Mello, and I guess I should probably pause for a second and mention this dude too. His name is Matt. He was actually in that scene from episode 32, back when Mello was listening in to the conversation between Misa and Mogi. Yeah, he didn't say anything back then, and obviously no one's saying anything that we can hear right now, but he'll have a somewhat larger role to play later in this episode. But getting back to Mello, he looks kinda out of it, right? Like he motions to eat his chocolate and just stops and puts it down instead, which is, I think, a first for him. I've never seen my boy not eat his chocolate, so something's gotta be going on. But as far as the next couple of scenes are concerned, there's not too much to discuss. One of them is showing Light and Takada during one of their date nights while the task force listens into their conversation. And the other shows Eminem playing a game of what I believe is Othello. It's a popular board game in Japan, apparently, in the same way that checkers is in other countries. Now, for the next 3 scenes, we hop back and forth for a bit, starting with Giovanni on what must be either the 14th, 17th, 21st, or 24th of January, since he's back in the locker room at Mikami's gym about to break into it. This is followed by us heading back to Nier and Rester for a second, as we see Nier playing with a bunch of Ultraman toys, I think, which I thought was interesting because in episode 5 of Code Geass, we also see what I believe to be an Ultraman toy. But anyway, for the 3rd scene, we immediately hop back over to Mikami as we see him leaving the gym. And this is where we get our first line of the episode.
Nier, it's all taken care of.
Good.
Now, what's been taken care of, I can't say just yet, but as I frequently do say in my Code Geass videos, we will get to it. I mean, hell, we only got 2 episodes left after this one. It's really coming down to the wire now. But okay, from there we actually head back to the task force and, oh shit, it's Ryuk. He's here? Just hanging out with the task force? Wait a second. What the hell? Okay, see, this is the problem with having Ryuk pop in and out of existence when so many people can see him now. Because before, I never had to question where Ryuk was when he wasn't on screen because I knew that he was with Light. But now, given Ryuk's ability to bounce between Death Note owners, or just fuck off and go wherever he wants, I guess, it's hard to tell where he's at any given moment. Like, for example, the last time we saw him at Task Force headquarters was in episode 31, during this scene right here when Light was telling the Task Force members that they could reach out to Nier if that's what they really wanted to do. After that, we only ever see him with Mikami, as we did at the very end of that same episode, as well as 2 different times in episode 32. But then after that, we don't see him at all, which wouldn't be a big issue if he was still with Mikami, seeing as he's using a fake notebook. So even with Giovanni having touched that notebook, he still wouldn't be able to see Ryuk. But Ryuk suddenly being with the task force is actually an issue, specifically because of the direction they've taken with their investigation since he's been gone. And what I'm saying is, how can they discuss the fact that Light is currently investigating Takada and getting her to betray Kira when Ryuk, Kira's personal Shinigami, is in the fucking room? This just seems so silly because do they not think Ryuk is still in contact with Kira? Do they not wonder where he goes sometimes? I mean, obviously he's left at least 3 times because that's the number of times we've seen him with Mikami. So I don't understand how they can openly discuss the investigation, which they seem to be doing right now with him in the room. It just seems so ridiculous to me. If Kira were anyone other than Light, then both he and Takada would be so dead right now. But anyway, the final part of this opening sequence sees us returning to Mikami for a quick second as we see him alone in his office examining the notebook under a microscope. This then leads to us transitioning to Takada's apartment, which, wow, that's a lot of dudes on her security detail. But I guess it makes sense given she clearly garners enough attention to warrant the extra protection. But as far as what I was saying, Mikami has clearly noticed something because he ends up telling Takada,
I've confirmed it.
And yeah, so it looks like something's been done to the notebook. And as far as what we can infer right now, it seems to be something that Light was expecting, given Light's message to Takada in the previous episode, wherein he wanted her to tell him when Mikami confirmed that something had happened, which is actually what she does right after this, as we see Light getting the exact message he told her to send last time. I can't wait to see you. And real quick, I also wanted to point out the date here on this text, because apparently it's the 23rd now, which is really just the night of the 22nd, like it's 2 a.m. on the 23rd. So this must mean that Giovanni did whatever he did to the notebook on the 21st, because that was a Monday.
All I have to do is wait for Nier to request a meeting face to face. Game over, Nier. I win.
Okay, so whatever's going on here, Light seems fairly confident that he's got Nier by the balls at this point, which is really kind of hard to dispute. I mean, we've seen Team Kira making somewhat obscure but seemingly very effective moves against the SPK. Like with the creation of a fake notebook, the use of said notebook, fake or real, in public places, and the whole Mikami talking to himself about shit that never happened. Like, when it comes to Mikami specifically, everything that he's been doing has been very intentional and meant to make it seem like the SPK has everything under control. From them finding him to confirming he has the notebook, and now, apparently, they've even gone ahead and secretly done something to the notebook that they feel is going to ensure their victory. In their eyes, they're killing it. But in reality, they're falling into some sort of trap. And if they do what Light says they're going to do next, which is request a meeting face to face, then it really does seem like Light might have this one in the bag. But let's actually see if they do end up doing that. Now from there we check back in with the SPK, where we see Giovanni reaching out to Nier and Rester to let them know that he's continued following Mikami as instructed. And apparently he's been doing it for an additional 3 days, which means it's either the 24th or 26th. It depends on if we're going by the last time we saw him talk to Nier, which would have been the 21st, or if we're going by the last time a date was shown on the screen, which would have been the 23rd. All I can really say for sure is that it's before the 28th. But as far as what Giovanni has discovered over the course of the last 3 days, nothing's changed as far as Mikami's behavior, which is good. It means that he, theoretically, hasn't noticed whatever it is they've done. But okay, with Nier confident that Mikami hasn't noticed whatever it is they've done to the notebook, he decides to, he decides to reach out to Light.
I want to meet you.
It really is all going according to Keikaku again. Now, the first part of this conversation isn't too important. It's just Nier stating that he wants to meet with L in order to show him something that'll put an end to the investigation. Now, obviously, he doesn't say what that thing is, but we can infer that it must have something to do with whatever he did to the notebook. And from there, Light goes on to agree to meet up, claiming that he'll be happy to put these baseless allegations of him being Kira to rest once and for all. Now, with them in agreement about meeting up, Nier goes ahead and lays down some ground rules for how this will all go down. He starts by saying that he wants everyone to show up for this, meaning all of the members of the SPK, as well as all of the members of the Kira task force. And as far as Misa is concerned, they'll release her before they head to the meeting spot, which is a little weird, but we can talk more about that part later. But when it comes to where they'll meet,
There's a warehouse on the outskirts of the southeast side that's been abandoned for some time. It's known as the Yellow Box.
and yeah, this is where the finale will ultimately take place. So we'll be seeing more of it in the not so distant future.
With a location like this, you can do what you're planning to do.
So this line makes it clear that this is all meant to be a sort of setup on Nier's part. That Nier knows that Light has something planned and that his goal is to catch him in the act, which is the only way to ensure that he is caught fair and square. And with the way that he's smirking and talking confidently about the fact that he knows Light has something planned, well, it makes it seem like maybe he is aware of what's going on. But then, it's hard to feel that way because there's nothing that makes it clear that he's seen through what Light's been doing. Honestly, when looking at the situation, my confidence in who's gonna win here is leaning way more towards Light, because I can see him accurately making assumptions about what Nier is gonna do next. We see him ordering the creation of a fake notebook. We see him having Mikami check said notebook, and we see him correctly deducing that Nier was going to reach out to do exactly what he's doing right now, which is inviting him to meet in person. Meanwhile, when it comes to Nier, from our POV, it just seems like he's falling into each and every trap that Light has set. Honestly, old boy seems cooked. He just doesn't know it yet. Now from there, Nier goes on to make his next demand, which is that someone has to bring the notebook with them. And when questioned on why he wants that, he responds by saying that if your whole team is at the Yellow Box, then no one is going to be there watching it. But then that leads into the final thing that they have to discuss, which is when they'll meet.
Say, 3 days from now, on the 28th at 1 p.m.
And Light has no issue with it. In fact, he ends up telling himself that that's the exact time he thought Nier would choose. And yeah, 3 days from now, the fate of the investigation, And hell, not to be too overdramatic, but really the fate of the world will be decided. And to make things even more unclear in regard to just how this shit is going to end up playing out, we have both of them confidently saying this as the scene draws to a close.
I know exactly what your plan is, and I am going to win.
And it's the fact that they're both just so confident in knowing that they're going to beat the other person that really does serve to throw you off in regard to who's going to walk out of that warehouse as the victor. But just one more thing before we move on, I wanted to point out that this moment is very reminiscent of the one from episode 2. You know, the one where Light and Ryuzaki are both shouting that they are justice.
I will eliminate you. I am justice.
And I just thought that little parallel was pretty neat. But from there, we switch to Light and Takada during one of their date nights, and this scene is just really quick. It's basically just there to let us know that Light has made Takada aware of the fact that January 28th is when everything ends. Now, I will add that at one point, Light says that he's got a lot on his plate right now, and Takada responds by saying,
"Does that mean you can't stay until morning?"
Which is, I mean, are they fucking? I can't tell. Like, to me, this implies that he must stay with her until the morning frequently enough that it's a surprise that he can't do it tonight. And the idea that they're just talking all night seems unlikely given the obvious chemistry that they have with each other. But again, I don't know, because at the same time, it seems like it'd be so awkward to try and get it in with these guys listening in. But, I mean, maybe joke's on me, they're into that shit? I don't know. But moving on from this scene, we switch to the next day, probably? I mean, there's not a whole lot of time. There's only 3 days until this thing is over, so it's gotta be the next day, meaning it's the 26th. But the scene starts with Takada arriving at NHN, and we can see that there are a lot of people here, like dozens of Takada's fans just hanging out, hoping to get a glimpse of her as she makes her way in. Which I guess confirms that the person from the opening of this episode must have been doing something they weren't supposed to do, because her bodyguards aren't doing anything to try and get these people to disperse. But okay, when it comes to this scene, it's immediately apparent that things are a bit off. Probably not for the people there, but given the way the opening of Taji is playing in the background and the way everything's just kind of moving in slow motion, it's given ominous vibes. And this is amplified by the fact that we see a red Plymouth, I'm pretty sure that's a 70s kind of Plymouth, pulling up real slow around the corner. And as the scene progresses, it looks like we're right to think that something's up, because it turns out that the person driving that car is Matt. Y'all remember Matt, right? He still hasn't actually spoken or anything, but he's, existed. And to be fair, dude was just waiting for his time to shine. Because if you didn't know who he was before, you sure will after this. So yeah, Matt just pulled up and caused a scene. A hell of a scene, as he shrouded the area in a smokescreen. And in the ensuing chaos, we see Takada and Lindner trying desperately to make their way into the building. But before they get the chance, someone rolls up and offers them a helping hand.
It's best if you get her away from here right now. Miss Takada, get on.
Yeah, Mello just showed up to save the day. And if it wasn't already obvious, Mello and Matt were the ones watching Takada and Lindner during that opening sequence. Basically, they were doing some recon before enacting this plan. Now, before we continue, I wanted to point out the fact that after Mello says this, we get this moment here where Lindner just stares at him for an extended period of time. Like she knows it's him. Her inner thoughts make it clear that she does. But I want to take note of how she hesitates for a moment before telling Takada that she ought to go with them, because I want to talk more about this particular moment in a future video. But also, just, real quick, when it comes to Lindner telling Takada to go off with Mello, it's a little strange, right? Like, Mello's been pretty consistently antagonistic towards the SPK. Like, I know the last time we saw him, he had mentioned the SPK was providing him with information, but it's never really confirmed whether or not they were actually actively working together. And I feel like that's partly due to the fact that since then, or hell, since they all met up in person back in episode 30, Mello's kind of disappeared from the show. I mean, he's only appeared in 4 scenes since then. One at the airport, the one I just mentioned with the sharing information bit, and then twice during the opening sequence of this episode. And he didn't even have any dialogue in 2 of those. So really, since we've seen so very little of him, it's hard to determine the extent of his relationship with the SPK these days. But okay, one last thing before we move on. I just wanted to say that this whole situation reminds me of a mission that you gotta do in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. It's the one that you do for OG Loc called Management Issues, where you have to steal the car and then pick up / kidnap the celebrity. It's basically the same thing that we're seeing here, what with Mello having replaced whoever was supposed to be driving this motorcycle before they all got here. I mean, it's probably just me, but it was the first thing that came to my mind when rewatching this scene. But getting back to the story, we see Mello take off with Takada as part of her entourage follows closely behind them. But they don't stick with them for long, as Mello ends up taking a quick turn down a side street and ultimately ditches them. He then pulls out a pair of handcuffs and binds Takada to himself as they make their way out of the city. And that's where we're going to leave things for now, as we jump back into how to use it. First up, in the world of Gods of Death, there are a few copies of what humans may call a user guidebook for using the Death Note in the human world. However, the guidebook is not allowed to be delivered to humans. So that's interesting. I wish we could actually see one because I'm curious as to what it actually looks like. Is it like a regular Death Note? Is it just a collection of papers? Is what we're viewing during the mid-episode break what they look like a bunch of flashcards with the rules on them? I have no concept of what this looks like, so I don't know what to make of it really. But I guess it is cool in a sort of meta way, because humans aren't supposed to see them, so that would explain why we never have. But anyway, next up, it is perfectly okay for Gods of Death to read the guidebook for him or herself and teach humans about its contents, no matter what the content may be. So just like that first one, this rule is so straightforward that I really don't have anything to add, and there's really not anything extra to extrapolate from it. To my knowledge, none of the Shinigami that we've seen so far have brought this up or even used it. I was gonna argue that maybe Ryuk did, that maybe that's how he knew what to write in the instructions for the one that he dropped, but really, Ryuk was more clueless about how to use it than Rim was, so I'm doubting that's the case. Now, when we get back from the break, we see this guy reporting on the Takada situation. But really, what he has to say isn't all that important. He's just making it known that Takada's bodyguards and the NPA are hot on the kidnappers' tails. Which is true, because as we turn our focus back to Matt, we see that they've managed to cut him off, effectively ending the chase. And as he, Akira slides his way to a stop, we see all of Takada's bodyguards pull out guns and... you know what? I actually want to point out something that Matt says as he gets out of the car.
Since when were the Japanese allowed to carry around such big guns?
And that's worth noting because outside of those in law enforcement, the use of handguns is not permitted in Japan. Like, that was a whole thing back in episodes 23 and 24, when both the Chief and Light refused to take weapons because it was illegal.
Japanese law forbids civilians from having guns.
No thanks, firearms aren't allowed in Japan.
But getting back to this scene, it becomes pretty clear that Matt's not really all that concerned about his current situation. He's kinda whatever about it, which is really surprising given the fact that he has dozens of guns aimed directly at him. But he claims that he knows they won't shoot him since they're gonna want to interrogate him and ask him questions about where his partner took Takada and... like, maybe that would have been the case, but the thing is, after he says that, he begins slowly reaching for a gun, and it's like, bro, even if they did want to question you about Takada, they're not going to risk getting shot just so that they can interrogate you, especially when they're still going to kill you after that anyway. So, given the fact that Matt reaches for his gun, it just seems like bro has a death wish or something. And if that is the case, then, well...
your wish has been granted.
And yeah, here we say goodbye to Matt. Cause, he did. He hella did. And I'm not gonna lie, his death really bugs me because he comes across as just really dumb. But then I thought about it some more, and this is just going to be me injecting my own personal headcanon here, but maybe to him, this was the smart play. Maybe he went out like this because he was worried that if he was taken into custody, then Kira might use the notebook to force him to reveal all of the information he had regarding what he and his accomplice had planned. I mean, I don't believe the notebook can be used to do that, but it's not like he knows everything there is to know about how the Death Note works. But yeah, I just feel like that motivation works better than him saying, "Oh, you guys aren't gonna kill me," as he reaches for the handle of his gun. Like, that's just silly. But anyway, R.I.P. Matt. You will be, honestly, probably forgotten, but hey, you know what? You did manage to help Mello get away, so at least your death wasn't in vain. And hell, I'm sure Mello will remember you and help keep your memory alive until the day that he dies. Anyway, where were we?
What an idiot.
I know y'all ain't talking, cause y'all are dumb as hell too. Like I mentioned this earlier, but they had him surrounded. As in, they surrounded him in a circle, with everyone pointing their gun at him in the center of that circle. Like, do y'all see the issue with this? Because there's a pretty big, glaring one that can be summed up with a single question. What happens if you miss? Cause, fun fact, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. So if you're firing a gun at your target and miss, well, that bullet's just gonna keep on going. And sure, it might end up lodged in the side of this car, that's definitely possible, but it's also very possible that it could ricochet off of the car, which is actually something that we do see happen. Just like it's also very possible that you don't hit either of them and your bullet just keeps going straight across the intersection and into the fucking crowd. Like, there's no way that you could convince me, given how many times these guys fired their guns, that no one else here got shot. So yeah, Matt may have been dumb for opting to choose death by firing squad, but these guys are way dumber for all firing in unison as opposed to just having one or two of them shoot to minimize the risk. But okay, let's go ahead and keep it moving. Now from there we check back in with Mello and Takada, as we see him pulling his motorcycle into a semi-truck trailer while Takada thinks to herself about a conversation that she previously had with Light, wherein he apparently gave her a heads up about Mello, so she actually already knows his real name. And just, you know, as a reminder, in case anyone is confused as to how Light knows Mello's real name, it's because the chief spelled it out before he said it back in episode 29. But yeah, since Takada knows his name, it means that if she can manage to get that helmet off of him, then she can, theoretically, kill him herself as long as she has a page of the notebook with her. But that being said, that's a big if. Because trying to forcibly take that helmet off his head while he's holding her at gunpoint is gonna be ridiculously difficult. I mean, it's his last shred of protection against being killed by the notebook, so of course if she tried to take it off, he'd fight tooth and nail to stop that from happening. Why would you do that? Why would you just take it off and show your face? Are you stupid? I mean, sure, he does tell her to take off all her clothes, and not in a Shibui Maru kind of way, but more in a, I don't know if you have a piece of the notebook on you, so I need to play it safe kind of way. But still, you could have just not taken off the helmet. But whatever, this is where we are, as Takada turns around and begins undressing. However, this is not where we're gonna stay, because the show actually transitions to Nier and the task force as we see him preemptively making it very clear that he didn't have shit to do with what's going on with Takada. Which makes sense for him to do, seeing as they'd likely automatically think that it was him, given what he pulled with Misa and Mogi. But yeah, Nier goes on to tell them that it was definitely Mello, given Lindner told Nier about it after it happened. Though, I do wonder if she also told Nier that she willingly let Mello take off with Takada, because it's not explicitly stated whether or not she relayed that bit of information. But after hearing this, Light asks if Nier can get in contact with Mello. But Nier says that while he does have a way to get in contact with Mello, there's no way that he's gonna respond right now, given the circumstances. Which, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Now from there we leave these guys and check back in with Takada and Mello, as we see Takada getting ready to remove the last bit of her attire, her bra. But before she takes it off, she asks Mello to give her the blanket that he's holding so that she can, cover up. And Mello, being the gentleman that he is, hands it over. Now, she very likely does want to cover up as not to have, everything just hanging out. But really, what's more important is the fact that she does have a piece of the notebook tucked away in her bra, which is a smart place to hide it. But anyway, she manages to secretly pull the piece out of her bra and keep it in her hand as she finishes disrobing. And from there, we fast forward a bit to see Mello driving the truck.
This is the only thing that can be done. If I don't do it...
And we'll come back to that later. Now from there, we see him turn his attention to the news, where he finds out that Matt is dead. And he seems pretty sad about it. I don't really know the extent of their relationship or anything like that, but he says that he never thought Matt would wind up dead, which I will say is a little odd. Like, bro had the whole city after him, and it's not like he was driving a Honda Civic or something inconspicuous. No, bro was rolling around in a bright red 70s American muscle car, so yeah, the likelihood that he was gonna actually get away was pretty low. But as Mello is driving and thinking about his dearly departed friend, we move to the back of the truck where we find Takada writing on the scrap of the notebook. And it's crazy to me because this is it. This is how Mello dies. And it just feels so weirdly anticlimactic. Like, I get that it's supposed to be intense, what with the shaking camera, the sound of her breathing heavily, the quick cuts zooming into her body and then her face and then her eye, which is red for some reason, which is such a weird choice for this situation because one could look at this and think she might have the Shinigami eyes. But to be clear, she doesn't. So okay, let's just see what happens next before we dive into Mello's death. So from there, the scene switches to the task force where we see Light getting a call from Takada, and she sounds terrified.
Light, please save me.
And I just want to say, Heather Dorkson does a great job of selling the fact that Takada is going through it right now as she begs for Light to save her. And from there, we actually transition back to Takada and... okay, this is kind of a clusterfuck, but let's try and make sense of it all together. I guess, first things first, Mello's dead, and I know it seems weird for me to just casually blurt that out, but I'm giving it the same emotional weight that the show has given it, which is basically none. Like, he's just dead, died off screen. All we see is his corpse. And they do try to make it more intense by adding that same shaking camera effect while Takada tells Light that she did it, but it plays as more so traumatic for Takada than it does an emotional send-off for Mello, which... the more I think about it, the more it irritates me. Like, holy shit, we saw Matt die. We saw him get shot. We saw him collapse. We saw his cigarette fall from his mouth as he took his final breath. And we don't even know that guy. But Mello, the dude who kidnapped the director of the MPA, who also kidnapped and traumatized the chief's daughter, our protag's sister, the man who stole the Death Note via a ballistic missile and then used it to decimate over half of the SPK, including the director of the FBI, the guy who turned a god of death into his personal bitch, the man who wound up getting the chief, our protag's father, killed, the guy we've spent the last several episodes with, is just fucking killed off screen. Like, what? This is just... I don't even know what to say, really. It just seems so disrespectful. And I'm not even a huge fan of Mello or anything, but it's just such a shitty death. Dude wasn't even killed by Kira or a Shinigami. He was killed by Kira's side piece. Like, god damn. Like, when you compare the moments leading up to this death to all the other important and semi-important characters' deaths, like Ray Penber struggling to turn around and seeing that it's Light who's Kira, or Naomi realizing at the very last moment that she's just been killed by Kira, or Watari struggling to delete everything as he died after having his name written down by Rem, or Ryuzaki staring up at Light as he smiles down on him, essentially confirming that he is, in fact, Kira. Hell, even Ukita, he died in front of Sakura TV as he tried in vain to call for help. Like, all of those moments hit really hard, and this one just didn't. At least not for me. But okay, now that I've gotten that out of my system, let's get back to whatever else is going on here, because it's honestly a little confusing. Like, the biggest issue I'm having is, who broke the glass here? You would think that it was Takada, right? Given the blood on her side of the wall. But that doesn't actually make sense. Because look at the glass on the floor. The fact that so much of it is on her side of the wall implies that it was shattered from the other side, which would mean that Mello did it. And I don't have a problem with that. In fact, it actually makes sense that she would use the death note to write instructions for what he ought to do before he dies. But the thing is, she didn't do that. And we know that she didn't do that because at one point they actually show the scrap of paper and all she wrote was the dude's name, which is just so stupid because you had so much room to write down some other instructions. You could have written that he pulls the car over, unlocks the container, lets you out, and then eats a bullet. Like, girl, why would you just kill him? That's so stupid because now you're just stuck. But then that brings me back to the glass, which we're just gonna have to assume is an animation error, seeing as she didn't write any instructions down, meaning she must have broken it herself, hence why she's covered in blood. But alright, with that settled, let's talk about the conversation that Light and Takada have, because it's rough, I'm not gonna lie. Now, the first thing Light does is ask her where she is, and she responds by saying that she's not exactly sure, that her kidnapper put her in the back of a truck and locked it from the outside. Takada also says that all she knows is that she managed to see a sign that said that they were heading towards Nagano. And just for reference, that's about a 3-hour drive from Shibuya, which is where I assumed they originally were, given that's where Matt died. Now, after that, Light uses some coded language to basically ask her if she did what she was supposed to do in a situation like this, which is to kill her kidnapper. And this is her response.
I did what you told me to, Light. I did it.
Yes.
And y'all, I feel really bad for Takada because you can hear I don't even know what to call it. I want to say the anguish in her voice as she says this, but I feel like it's more complicated than just that. Like, in addition to the anguish, I also hear a level of frustration mixed with a compounding unsteadiness given all that she's been through in the last few hours. Like, straight up, this is not what she signed up for at all. And hell, realistically, she didn't sign up for this. She got drafted. And I'm sure that she understood that there was a chance that something bad like this could happen given how divisive Kira is. But given the level of security that she had, and the fact that anyone who would think to go after her would likely be deterred given, if they were caught, Kira would end up killing them, she probably thought that she was relatively safe. So, to now find herself stripped, bloodied, and trapped after being kidnapped by someone at gunpoint, and then having had to kill that person and actually be present when they died, I mean, fucking hell, if anyone needed some kindness shown to her, it'd be Takada in this situation. But unfortunately, that's not what she's getting from Light. This dude could not care less about her. He's just happy that Mello's finally off the board. And hell, even after that's confirmed, he still shows her no empathy.
Save me!
Miss Takada, you remember what I told you to do after that, don't you?
I know, but Light...
Can you do it?
Like, this man gives no fucks about her, and that's gotta be rough. But also, just real quick, the thing that she's supposed to do now is kill as many people as possible while she still has the chance. Because, she's the one that's actually doing the killings now that Mikami has been resigned to using that fake notebook. Which is interesting because how many names can she realistically fit on that small piece of paper? But to move things along, after that we see her eyes swell up with tears as she tells Light that she can do it. and then he just hangs up on her. Like, it's so messed up, because after that, we just see her start bawling as Light and the others head out towards her location. Now from there, we switch to old Mikami as he receives a call from Takada, and she's asking him to send her as many names as possible for her to kill, asking that he send the information over to her email. Anyway, real quick, I wanted to point out that here we see Mikami embody his own personal color, which is, interestingly enough, purple. And while this is the first time that I'm discussing it, it isn't the first time that we've seen it. We actually saw him embody it briefly in episode 32, but I just kind of forgot to mention it. And honestly, at first, it felt like kind of an odd choice, because someone else also had this color in the past. That person being Namikawa from Yotsuba. And at the time, I felt like purple being chosen to represent him made a lot of sense. I commented on how the color purple is made by mixing both red and blue, and how, given the fact that Namikawa had found himself stuck between L and Kira, red and blue, it made sense that his color was purple. But with Mikami, I didn't really understand the choice at first. But then I looked into it some more, and while choosing purple for him doesn't make sense in the same way it did for Namikawa, it still does make sense when you look into the actual color theories behind purple. Specifically, its negative connotations, such as sensitivity, vigilance, immaturity, and being emotional, all of which can be attributed to Mikami in one way or another. Like with his ideological sensitivity and how he feels that anything that threatens it needs to be deleted. His hypervigilance when it comes to those committing evil acts, like with the kids on the train a couple of episodes ago. Then there's his immaturity in regard to never outgrowing his absolutist view of the world. And then there's his being emotional in the sense of how he chooses to express his feelings about Kira. And boy, are we gonna have a field day with that in the near future. But yeah, all of that to say, at the end of the day, purple suits Mikami, practically and aesthetically. But okay, from there we see Mikami consider the situation, telling himself that if she's calling him, it must mean that she's killed her kidnappers, which is kinda wild because I never noticed this before, but both he and Light transition into their respective colors and have essentially the same thought.
The only reason she'd be able to call me like this was if she had an opportunity to get away from Mello. Or if Takada is calling me like this, it must mean that she's been able to kill her kidnappers.
And I thought that was noteworthy considering, well, anyway, it's mostly a common sense kind of thing, so it's not too surprising that they both thought of it, but it is the second time that their thoughts have mirrored each other in a shared situation, so I figured I'd point it out. Now from there, Mikami leaves work so that he can help Takada out with those names and faces. And from there we transition to Aizawa, Ide, and Light as they make their way towards Takada. And Aizawa says something that kinda threw me off.
Karuizawa, huh? Damn, it'll take at least 30 minutes to get there.
And I just thought that that was a little strange because they're in Shibuya, or Tokyo, right? I mean, I figured they'd have to be close to where Takada works if Light is meeting up with her every night. So when it comes to Karuizawa, that is not 30 minutes from Shibuya by car. That's at least 2 hours. But maybe they had been driving for an hour and a half before getting a bead on her location. But regardless, the good thing is that they're on their way to save Takada, to get her out of this horrible situation that she's found herself in. And while Light was kinda cold to her on the phone, he does seem a lot more concerned now.
Hurry, this is Mello we're talking about. Who knows what he'll do?
However, his inner thoughts don't quite align with that outward projection.
I don't believe this. Aizawa and Ide are just too stupid.
And I hate him. I really do. Like, my goodness, these two are so stupid because they actually care about getting there and rescuing her. Like, dude, come on. Why are you such a piece of shit? Oh my. But, okay, the scene ultimately ends with him reaching for his watch and revealing the hidden scrap of the notebook that he keeps in there. And, well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what he plans on doing next. And from there we switch back to Takada, as we see her curled up in the fetal position with the sun shining directly behind her. And after a moment, we see her get up and start walking towards the opposite end of the container. And I found it interesting that we see her walking away from the light that's emanating from the broken window behind her so that she can, instead, walk into the darkness that's in front of her. And as she steps into that darkness, we hear the all too familiar sound of a single booming heartbeat, which makes it clear that it's begun, that the death note has her now. And it's such a harrowing moment as she lets out a final breath and the light in her eyes just disappears. And to be clear, she's not having a heart attack. I just want to establish that real quick because it's actually so much worse than that. Because as the scene transitions from this, we see Lindner driving towards where she's located. I guess Mello may have contacted her, or maybe she had an idea of where he might go. I'm not entirely sure. But she soon arrives at the location, and when she gets out of the car, she sees this.
No, Mello.
Yeah, Light had Takada set everything on fire, including herself. No simple heart attack for her, no, suicide by fucking fire. And when the task force arrives shortly after, this is how he looks on at his work. He fucking smiles. Just, ugh. But in regard to Takada's death, I feel so conflicted. Because on one hand, Takada was kind of a piece of shit, but that was mostly in regard to her trying to stunt on Misa. Outside of that, she wasn't really a bad person, at least not in the same way Light and Mikami are. Yes, she seemed to fully embrace her role as Kira's spokesperson, and yes, I know she killed some folk, but context matters, so it's still hard not to see her as at least somewhat of a victim in all of this. Because you have to remember, she didn't choose this. Yes, she was a Kira supporter in private, but she didn't apply for this position. She didn't campaign for it. It was thrust upon her. Forced upon her, really, because even if Kira reached out and phrased it as a question or a choice, it's not one. You don't say no to Kira lest you want to risk ending up on the wrong side of his pen. Not only that, but when Light does eventually show up, he immediately begins love bombing her in a way that only he can, telling her everything that she wants to hear, quite literally promising her the world. But even with all of those promises, we see that she has no desire whatsoever to start acting as Kira when he makes that request. Which, to be clear, much like with Mikami's request for her to be the spokesperson, it's really just a politely worded demand. Because in the back of her mind, she knows this charming man who claims to want her and love her does have the capacity, the willingness even, to kill if he believes that someone is a threat to him. So, probably best not to give him a reason, you know? So, seeing how her worst actions, being the spokesperson, doing the killings, were all things that she didn't really have a say in, it complicates how I feel about her. And then, when it comes to her death, the fact that she had ended up buying into the fantasy Light presented her with, if for no other reason than to cope with everything she had been pressured into doing, it's gotta be so heartbreaking to go from believing that this man really cared about her and loved her, to finding out after she's been attacked, abducted, stripped, and caged, after she's given him everything that he wanted from her, after calling him in tears, begging him to save her life, that it was all just bullshit. Like, he couldn't even feign empathy for her. No caring, no support, no love, just malice. It's tough. Honestly, I don't see how you can watch this and not be at least somewhat conflicted when it comes to Takada. Is she a perfect victim? No, not even close. But is she still a victim? Yeah, I'd say that she is. But anyway, getting back to Light, honestly, fuck this guy. He's not justice, he's not a god, he's just a piece of shit who let this woman who thought the world of him, who fucking loved him, die in a fiery death that he personally lit the match to. It's just so gross. But as far as the rest of the episode goes, it ends with him explaining that his instructions were for her to set everything on fire, including everything that she wrote on, thus ensuring that no one ever finds out about her acting as Kira. And roll credits. Anyway, that's the end of this video, but before we go, I just want to give a shout out to all the folks over on our Patreon who are helping to support the channel. I want to thank all of our admirable assessors, our invaluable investigators, as well as our remarkable researchers, like Arrow Falcon Green, Blazing Fury 05, Game and Alchemist, Gary Wong, Jorge Ochoa Reyes, Legend Dragon, Mitch Kokoran, Pellets, Staff of the Crystal Serpent, The Best, Trinity Schiffer, Tyrant Link, Vanellian, and Yggdrasil. And lastly, a special shout out to our official overanalyzers. Thank you Archangel89, Asia, Birdbath Keeper, Bob Van K, Cavarax XE, Chicken Wugget, Cody For Now, Seamard, Croy Raiden, Amelia, Glitch Faust, I Am the Blonde Asshole, Jack Witt, Joey Hellbig, Josh Thompson, and Shinigo, who actually did the intro for this episode. I just want to say thanks again to all of y'all for helping make these videos possible. But yeah, if you like this video, then consider dropping a like. If you really liked it, then consider subscribing. And if you just loved it and want to support the channel, then consider joining the Patreon. Anyway, that's it for this time. Until next time, friends. Peace.